Hey there. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your bed, let me transport you back 3,500 years to a time when Europe's first superpower ruled the waves from a palace that would make modern architects weep with envy. You're about to discover why an entire civilization that invented flush toilets, had 4-story buildings, and created art so beautiful it still takes your breath away, simply vanished. Welcome to this journey through time. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is as you prepare for sleep. Are you tucked under warm blankets, perhaps with rain pattering against your window? So, dim the lights, adjust your pillow just right, and close your eyes if you'd like. Tonight, you'll walk the marble corridors of Knossos alongside Prince Theron. Witness the last days of a civilization that controlled the entire Eastern Mediterranean, and discover why this advanced society that gave birth to Greek mythology disappeared so completely that we didn't even know they existed until 1900. You'll hear about their strange rituals, their deadly bull-leaping ceremonies, and the catastrophic event that erased them from history. Let your breathing slow as we begin this ancient tale. The morning sun casts long shadows across the central courtyard of Knossos as you stand beside Prince Theron, watching slaves unload Egyptian gold from merchant ships in the harbour below. The year is 1470 BCE, though you wouldn't know it by that name. And the Minoan Empire stretches across every island you can see from this terrace. Theron's bronze skin gleams with scented oil, his dark curls held back by a band of hammered silver depicting dolphins leaping through waves. The prince wears the traditional Minoan kilt, dyed the deepest blue from murex shells, its hem embroidered with golden threads forming sacred double axes. His bare chest displays the athletic build required for the bull-leaping ceremonies, while golden armlets spiral up his biceps like serpents. You notice how his eyes, lined with kohl in the Egyptian fashion, constantly scan the horizon as if watching for something only he expects. The morning prayers to the snake goddess have just concluded, and the priestesses, their exposed breasts painted with spirals of henna, retreat to the inner sanctums carrying their writhing serpents. The air smells of frankincense and sea salt, mixed with the earthy scent of the bulls kept in the lower chambers. Theron turns to you, his voice low and troubled, speaking of strange dreams where the earth shakes and the sea turns black. Visions that have plagued him since the last new moon. You follow Theron through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, past walls painted with breathtaking frescoes of blue monkeys gathering saffron and ladies in flounced skirts watching acrobats leap over charging bulls. The palace contains over 1,300 rooms, and even Theron, who's lived here since birth, occasionally takes a wrong turn in the deeper sections. Your footsteps echo on the gypsum floors, polished to mirror brightness, while overhead, light wells cut through 4 stories, bring sunshine into even the deepest chambers. The prince pauses at a doorway where his younger sister, Artemisia, practices the sacred bull dance with other initiates. She moves with liquid grace, her slim body bending backward as she mimes grasping invisible horns, her long, black hair whipping through the air. Like all palace women, she wears the ceremonial dress, a tight bodice that leaves her breasts exposed, painted with spirals representing the eternal cycle of life, and a bell-shaped skirt with 7 tiers, each dyed a different shade from yellow to deep crimson. Golden snakes coil around her arms, and her feet, bare and hennaed, make no sound on the practice floor. Theron watches with obvious concern as the dance master, a scarred veteran of 50 bull-leaping ceremonies, corrects her grip, knowing that tomorrow she faces her first real bull. And statistics show that 1 in 3 initiates don't survive their first leap. The feast hall fills with the aroma of roasted lamb seasoned with cumin and coriander as you join Theron at the high table, where King Minos himself presides over the evening meal. The king, despite his 60 years, still cuts an imposing figure with his massive chest and arms thick as ship masts from his youth spent rowing war galleys. His beard, once black as obsidian, now shows streaks of silver, oiled and braided with tiny golden bells that chime softly when he moves. He wears the sacred crown of Knossos, a tall cap of purple-dyed leather, adorned with peacock feathers and the golden labries, the double axe that symbolizes royal power. His robe, woven from silk brought by traders from lands beyond counting, shimmers with threads of gold and silver, forming patterns of octopi and dolphins. Around you, the court dines on delicacies that would astound future civilizations. Honeyed dormice, pickled sea urchins, and wine mixed with pine resin, served in cups shaped like bulls' heads. The king raises his rhyton, a drinking horn carved from a single piece of rock crystal, and toasts the success of tomorrow's bull ceremony, though you notice his hand trembles slightly, whether from age or from the same premonitions that plague his son. Serving girls, their waists cinched impossibly thin by years of training since childhood, glide between tables, pouring wine from vessels decorated with marine life, so realistic you expect the octopi to slither away. Dawn breaks as you accompany Theron to the sacred cave shrine high above the palace, where the oracle of the snake goddess dwells in permanent darkness. Her eyes sealed shut 20 years ago when she took her vows. The climb proves treacherous, following a path carved into living rock by priests 1,000 years before, each step worn smooth by countless pilgrimages. The oracle herself appears ancient beyond measure, though Theron whispers she has lived only 40 summers, aged prematurely by her communion with the goddess. Her skin, pale as bleached bone from decades without sunlight, stretches tight over her skull, while her hair, never cut since her initiation, pools around her like spilled milk. She wears nothing but serpents, living snakes that coil around her arms, her waist, her neck, their scales creating a living garment that shifts and writhes with each prophecy. The cave reeks of sulfur from volcanic vents below, and you struggle not to gag as she speaks in a voice like grinding millstones, telling of a great wave higher than the palace towers approaching from the south, carrying darkness and ending. Theron's face pales beneath his bronze complexion as she describes cities swallowed, fleets shattered like kindling, and a civilization's flame extinguished in a single day. The snakes hiss in unison as she concludes, their tongues tasting the air as if already sensing the approaching doom. You stand with Theron in the archive chamber as elderly scribes carefully press their reed styluses into soft clay tablets, recording the kingdom's transactions in the mysterious script that future archaeologists will call Linear A, never fully deciphering its secrets. Master scribe Daedalon, his fingers stained permanent black from a lifetime of ink making, oversees the recording of this year's tribute from vassal islands. Copper from Cyprus, silver from the Cyclades, obsidian from Milos, sharper than any bronze blade. His appearance speaks to a life spent in scholarly pursuits rather than physical labor. A soft belly protrudes over his scribal belt, and his shoulders hunch forward from decades, bent over tablets. He wears the simple white tunic of his profession, though his indicates rank through purple edges, and a golden pin shaped like a stylized squid. His bald head gleams with perspiration, despite the cool underground chamber, and thick lenses of polished crystal help his failing eyes read the tiny marks pressed into clay. Around you, younger scribes mix pigments for the wall painters, crushing lapis lazuli from Afghanistan for blue, malachite for green, grinding precious saffron for yellow, worth more than gold. Daedalon shows Theron disturbing reports from merchant captains. Ships vanishing without explanation in waters that have been safe for centuries, and strange reports of the sea pulling back from shores, leaving fish flopping on exposed seabeds before returning with unprecedented violence. The central courtyard transforms into an arena of death as you witness Artemisia's first bull-leaping ceremony, your heart pounding as loudly as the drums that echo off the painted columns. The bull chosen for her initiation stands massive and black, its horns gilded with gold leaf that catches the noon sun, steam rising from its nostrils in the cool air. Artemisia appears transformed from yesterday's practice, her skin oiled until it gleams, her hair braided tight against her skull, with red ribbons representing the blood she might soon spill. She wears only a loincloth of white linen, her breasts painted with protective symbols in blue woad, her muscles visible beneath her bronze skin as she circles the beast. The crowd of nobles presses against the barriers, their jeweled fingers clutching ivory fans, some betting on her survival, others already composing funeral songs. Theron grips your arm painfully as his sister begins her run, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground as she races toward the charging bull. Time slows as she grasps the horns, using the bull's own momentum to flip herself over its back in a perfect arc, landing on her feet behind the bewildered animal. The crowd erupts in cheers, throwing saffron flowers into the arena. But you notice Theron doesn't relax. 2 more leaps remain before she can claim victory, and the bull, now enraged, paws the ground with renewed fury. Night falls as you join Theron in the harbour district, where sailors speak in hushed whispers of impossible things witnessed at sea, their usual boastfulness replaced by genuine terror. Captain Alexios, his skin like weathered leather from 40 years sailing the wine-dark sea, refuses to leave port. Despite losing money each day, his ship sits idle. His face, mapped with deep lines from squinting against sun glare on water, bears fresh scratches from his own fingernails, self-inflicted during nightmares that plague him since his last voyage. He wears the practical garb of a merchant sailor, a short tunic that won't tangle in rigging, leather arm guards scarred from rope burns, and a cap of sealskin that supposedly protects against sirens' songs. Around his neck hangs a confusion of amulets from every port he's visited: Egyptian ankhs, Phoenician eyes, Cycladic fertility figures, all failing to ease his terror. His massive hands, each finger thick as a child's wrist from years hauling rope, shake as he describes what he saw 3 days south of Crete. The sea itself seemed to breathe, he says, rising and falling like a giant's chest, while fish leaped from the water, as if trying to escape something below. Most disturbing, he claims to have seen an island that shouldn't exist, a perfect cone rising from the waves, where his charts showed only deep water, smoke rising from its peak, like incense from a titan's altar. You descend with Theron into the underground workshops, where master craftsmen create treasures that will vanish forever with the Empire's fall. their techniques lost to time until archaeologists puzzle over them millennia later. The goldsmith Icaros, despite losing his left eye to a splashing of molten metal years ago, creates jewelry so fine that visiting Egyptian princes offer kingdoms for a single piece. His remaining eye, sharp as an eagle's, peers through a magnifying crystal as he sets microscopic granulations of gold onto a hairpin destined for the queen. His appearance tells the story of his dangerous craft. Burn scars web across his arms like silver rivers. His beard singed short to prevent catching fire. His leather apron pocked with hundreds of tiny holes from flying sparks. His workshop assistants, boys chosen for their steady hands and keen eyesight, pump bellows that feed the furnaces where gold becomes liquid sunshine. The master shows Theron, his latest commission, a rhyton shaped like a lion's head with rock crystal eyes, so lifelike you expect it to roar. But work has stopped on all luxury items as every craftsman now forges bronze spear points and sword blades on royal orders, preparing for a war that Theron fears won't come from human enemies. The constant hammering creates a rhythm like a giant's heartbeat, and you notice how the craftsmen flinch whenever the ground trembles slightly, a daily occurrence now that everyone pretends not to notice. Dawn brings you to the sacred peak sanctuary where Theron must perform the monthly sacrifice to appease the Earthshaker, the god who dwells beneath Crete and whose anger manifests in the tremors that have grown stronger each passing day. High Priestess Pasiphae presides over the ritual, her presence both magnificent and terrifying as she stands before the altar wearing the sacred horns upon her head. Each horn carved from a single piece of ivory and inlaid with gold, depicting the story of creation. Her face, painted white with gypsum to represent divine purity, makes her dark eyes appear as black pits that seem to see through flesh to the soul beneath. She stands nearly 6 feet tall, unusual for a Minoan woman, her height emphasized by the platform shoes of carved wood that add another hand's breadth. Her dress defies description. Thousands of golden scales sewn onto red fabric create the illusion of a serpent's skin that shifts and glimmers with each movement. The sacrifice itself, a pure white bull calf born under the last full moon, bellows in terror as if sensing its fate. Theron must hold the ceremonial knife, its obsidian blade sharper than any metal, while Pasiphae chants in the old language that predates even Linear A. You notice how her voice carries unnatural power, making the very air vibrate, and when the blade opens the calf's throat, the blood that spills seems too dark, almost black, as if the earth below has already claimed it. The palace archives yield disturbing discoveries as you help Theron search through clay tablets dating back 500 years, looking for any mention of similar omens in the kingdom's long history. The tablets, stored in basement rooms that smell of dust and ancient clay, contain records that paint a picture of a civilization more advanced than any would achieve for another 1,000 years. Here lie plans for plumbing systems with hot and cold running water, architectural blueprints for buildings that seem to defy gravity, and mathematical calculations that won't be rediscovered until Pythagoras. Young scribe Philemon assists your search, his fresh face still unmarked by years of squinting at tiny script. His enthusiasm not yet crushed by the tedium of record keeping. He wears the apprentice scribe's brown tunic, ink stains already marking his fingers despite only 3 months of training, and his shaved head bears the single lock of hair marking his student status. His excitement turns to fear as he uncovers a tablet from the time of King Minos's grandfather, describing almost identical portents: earth tremors, seas receding, and most chillingly, the complete disappearance of the colony on Thera Island. found empty of all life when ships arrived with supplies. The tablet breaks off mid-sentence, and the next dated tablet comes from 20 years later, with no explanation for the gap. Philemon's hands tremble as he shows you another tablet, a prayer for protection from the breath of the gods that burns without fire. You accompany Theron to the naval yards where Crete's mighty fleet, master of the Mediterranean for 5 centuries, prepares for an evacuation that the king refuses to officially order, but that every admiral quietly implements. Admiral Kairos, his left arm ending in a bronze hook from a battle with pirates in his youth, oversees the loading of supplies onto the 100 ships under his command. His face tells the story of a lifetime at sea, skin burned dark as mahogany, eyes permanently narrowed from sun glare, a nose broken and reset so many times it resembles a hawk's beak. He wears the purple cloak of his rank even in the sweltering heat, the fabric salt-stained and faded but still commanding respect. His remaining hand constantly touches the pommel of his sword, a nervous habit developed over 40 years of combat. The ships themselves are marvels of engineering, their hulls painted with eyes to see their way through treacherous waters, their sails dyed red with madder root to strike fear into enemies' hearts. But now they load not weapons, but grain, water, and crying children, whose noble parents send them away on pretexts of visiting relatives in distant colonies. Admiral Kairos pulls Theron aside, speaking in a voice hoarse from years of shouting over wind and wave, confirming that his navigators report compass needles spinning wildly, and dolphins, usually playful around ships, now flee northward in vast pods as if chased by invisible predators. The Potter's Quarter fills with frantic activity as you observe craftsmen working through the night to complete mysterious royal commissions. Thousands of storage jars large enough to hold a man, sealed with wax and marked with symbols even Theron doesn't recognize. Master Potter Cadmos, his hands permanently stained red from decades of working with clay, shapes vessels with supernatural speed, his fingers moving as if guided by invisible forces. His body bears the marks of his trade, a permanently hunchback from years at the wheel, arms corded with muscle from kneading clay, and lungs that wheeze from inhaling ceramic dust. He wears only a loincloth while working, his entire torso caked with dried clay that cracks and falls as he moves, creating the illusion that he's shedding his skin like a snake. His workshop employs 20 potters, all working on the same mysterious project, their wheels spinning in perfect synchronization, as if orchestrated by a single mind. The kilns burn hotter than ever before, the fires fed with precious olive wood that should be reserved for shipbuilding, and the heat makes the air shimmer like water. Cadmos shows Theron one completed jar, its interior glazed with a substance that looks like volcanic glass, completely waterproof and airtight. When asked about their purpose, he only shakes his head, saying the specifications came from the oracle herself, and questioning divine will invites catastrophe. You stand with Theron in the throne room as foreign ambassadors arrive with increasingly disturbing reports from across the empire's vast trading network. The Egyptian ambassador, Lord Amenhotep, sweats through his elaborate makeup despite the cool morning, his usual diplomatic composure cracking as he describes the Nile running backward for 3 days. His appearance maintains Egyptian court standards. Kohl-rimmed eyes, a false beard of gold wire attached to his chin, and a wig of countless tiny braids, each tipped with golden beads that click when he moves. His linen robe, so fine you can see through it, bears hieroglyphic prayers for protection that he unconsciously traces with his finger as he speaks. The Phoenician representative, Bal-Hadad, his purple robes marking him as royalty in his homeland, interrupts to report that their famous purple dye workshops have stopped production as the murex snails have vanished from their coastal waters overnight. His beard, dyed blue-black and curled in the Phoenician style, trembles as he describes finding thousands of the valuable shells empty on the beach, as if their inhabitants simply disappeared. Even the normally stoic Hittite ambassador shows fear, his scarred warrior's face pale as he reports that their mountain fortresses have recorded earth tremors strong enough to crack stone walls that have stood for centuries. Theron listens to each report with growing dread, recognizing a pattern that spans the entire known world. The sacred grove of ancient olive trees, planted by the first kings of Crete 1,000 years ago, provides the setting for a desperate ritual as Theron joins the ceremony to placate the angry earth. The trees themselves seem to sense impending doom, their leaves falling unseasonably, creating a silver carpet that crunches beneath bare feet. Priestess Ariadne, Theron's cousin and keeper of the sacred labyrinth, leads the ritual wearing nothing but paint and prayers. Her entire body serves as a canvas for sacred symbols. Spirals representing eternity cover her breasts. A serpent winds from her ankle to her hip, and across her back spreads a detailed map of the underworld painted in ochre and charcoal. Her hair, never cut since birth, reaches the ground and has been braided with sacred herbs that release hallucinogenic smoke when burned. She dances between the trees with movements that seem inhuman, her joints bending at angles that should break bones, her feet never quite touching the ground. The other participants, noble youth chosen for their purity, mirror her movements while chanting in a language so old that even its meaning has been forgotten, only the sounds remaining. You notice that the olive trees begin to bleed a red sap where the dancers touch them, and the ground beneath develops cracks that emit sulphurous steam. The ritual reaches its climax as Ariadne collapses, speaking in a voice not her own, prophesying in specifics that chill your blood. 3 days remain before the sea reclaims what it once gave. You descend with Theron into the deepest levels of the palace, areas forbidden to all but royal blood, where the true treasures of the empire lie hidden in chambers that haven't been opened in generations. The guardian of these vaults, an ancient eunuch named Pythios, moves with surprising grace despite his enormous bulk, a side effect of his castration in childhood. His skin, pale as a cavefish from decades underground, seems to glow in the lamplight, and his voice, high and fluting like a bird's, echoes strangely in the stone corridors. He wears robes of a fashion centuries out of date, maintained perfectly through careful storage. Their purple so deep it appears black, until light strikes it directly. His head, completely hairless, including eyebrows and lashes, gives him an ageless appearance. He could be 40 or 400. The treasures he reveals stagger comprehension. Tablets containing the true history of the kingdom, including mentions of a homeland that sank beneath the waves, forcing their ancestors to flee to Crete. Astronomical charts showing the positions of stars that won't be visible for another 1,000 years. And most disturbing, detailed plans for preserving essential knowledge in the event of civilizational collapse. Pythios shows Theron a chamber filled with the mysterious jars from the Potter's Quarter, now filled with scrolls wrapped in oiled leather, containing everything from medical knowledge to architectural principles, sealed against water and time. The Bull Court prepares for what everyone suspects will be the last great ceremony, as you watch athletes from across the empire gather for the sacred games, their bodies perfect specimens of human physical achievement. Champion leaper, Theseus of Athens, his golden hair marking him as foreign among the dark-haired Minoans, stretches muscles that ripple like waves beneath sun-bronzed skin. He stands 6 feet tall, unusual for the era, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke and a waist narrow as a maiden's. Scars crisscross his torso, like a map of victories, each marking a successful leap over increasingly dangerous bulls. He wears the champion's belt, leather-dyed crimson and studded with gold bulls, and his confidence borders on arrogance as he practices phantom leaps. His main rival, Asterion of Knossos, matches him in skill, but not in beauty. His face, broken by a bull's horn in his first ceremony, healed crooked, giving him a perpetual sneer. His body, while powerful, bears the thickness of a wrestler rather than a dancer's grace, and his black eyes hold a cruelty that makes spectators step back. The tension between them fills the practice court as they eye each other like bulls themselves, each knowing that tomorrow's ceremony carries stakes beyond mere glory. The ground trembles during practice, strong enough to make several leapers stumble, but they continue training with determined focus, as if perfecting their art might somehow prevent the disaster everyone feels approaching. The morning brings an emergency council as you witness King Minos struggling to maintain order while nature itself rebels against human control, his authority crumbling as surely as the palace walls that now show spreading cracks. The council chamber, its ceiling painted with stars that astronomers claim no longer match the night sky, fills with panicked nobles whose usual elaborate costumes look disheveled from sleepless nights. General Rhadamanthus, the king's brother and military commander, stands rigid in bronze armor that no longer shines, tarnished by the sulphurous air that has plagued the island for days. His grey beard, usually oiled to points, hangs limp, and his eyes, red from smoke and exhaustion, dart constantly to the exits as if planning escape routes. He reports that 3 garrison towers have collapsed overnight, not from enemy action, but from the earth's violence, and soldiers desert nightly, fleeing to the mountains despite threat of execution. The treasury minister, a skeleton-thin man named Sarpedon, whose fingers constantly count invisible coins, announces that the gold reserves show a strange phenomenon. Metal that should be incorruptible has developed a black patina overnight, as if aged 1,000 years. Even the water supply, pride of Minoan engineering, fails as the underground pipes crack and shift, forcing servants to haul water from increasingly distant wells that yield brackish, sulphur-tainted liquid. Theron watches his father age years in minutes as each report brings worse news, the king's mighty frame seeming to shrink within his robes. You follow Theron to the harbour where impossible scenes unfold. The sea itself has retreated, leaving ships stranded on exposed seabed like beached whales, their hulls already beginning to crack in the unnatural heat. Captain Alexios, the veteran sailor you met days ago, stands knee-deep in what should be 30 feet of water, picking up gasping fish with his bare hands and tossing them into baskets for what might be the last meal anyone enjoys. His crew, usually disciplined, have abandoned their posts to join citizens in gathering the sea's abandoned treasures. Octopi crawling desperately toward puddles, ancient amphorae exposed after centuries underwater, and horrifyingly, human skulls from shipwrecks that should never have been revealed. A young priestess named Chryseis, her ceremonial robes hiked up to her thighs, wades through the mud interpreting the phenomenon as divine punishment, her voice carrying over the chaos as she lists the kingdom's sins. Her paint runs in the heat, creating grotesque patterns on her skin, and her sacred snakes have died, hanging limp from her arms like macabre jewelry. The stench of rotting seaweed and dying marine life makes breathing difficult, and the exposed harbour floor reveals architecture that shouldn't exist. Stone quays and walls that extend far beyond where the shoreline has been for living memory. Theron orders his guard to forcibly evacuate citizens, knowing what the ocean's retreat means, having read the ancient tablets that describe this exact phenomenon preceding catastrophe. The Earth's violence reaches new heights as you experience your first major earthquake. The palace floors rolling like ocean waves, while Theron pulls you under a doorway. The only architectural feature strong enough to withstand the Earth's rage. The beautiful frescoes crack and fall in sheets, centuries of art destroyed in seconds, while storage jars the size of men topple and shatter, spilling grain and oil across floors that buckle and split. Artemisia, still recovering from her bull-leaping triumph, screams as her chamber's outer wall collapses entirely, revealing a view of the city below, where buildings fold into themselves like origami crushed by an invisible hand. She stands frozen in her sleeping gown, a simple linen shift, now covered in dust and blood from flying debris, her usual confidence shattered as completely as the pottery around her. Her hair, loose and wild, frames a face marked by a fresh cut across her cheek that will scar if she survives. The palace guards, elite warriors trained from childhood, huddle in doorways like frightened children, their bronze spears useless against an enemy that attacks from below. The captain of guards, a scarred veteran named Orestes, whose missing eye is usually hidden by a bronze patch, now openly weeps as he reports that the treasury has collapsed, burying alive the scribes who were trying to save the records. The earthquake continues for what feels like hours, but lasts only minutes, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than the violence, broken only by the groans of wounded architecture and wounded people. The oracle's prophecy manifests as you witness the southern horizon turn black at midday, not with storm clouds, but something far worse. A wall of water so tall it blocks out the sun, approaching with the speed of galloping horses. Theron races through the palace, ordering everyone to the highest floors, but many refuse to abandon their possessions, dooming themselves for gold that will be worthless in minutes. The wave reveals its true horror as it approaches, not clean blue water, but black mud, thick with volcanic ash, carrying massive boulders like toys, entire trees ripped from distant islands, and the wreckage of the southern fleet sent ahead as harbingers. A court musician named Orpheon, his delicate fingers still clutching his lyre, stands transfixed on a balcony composing what he announces as his death song, his voice carrying over the approaching roar. He wears the performer's elaborate costume, a robe decorated with golden musical notes that flutter in the wind created by the wave's approach, his face painted with silver tears that have become real ones. The wave strikes the harbour first, and you watch in horror as ships are thrown inland like spears, one crushing the temple of Poseidon in divine irony. The lower city disappears entirely, thousands of years of civilization erased in seconds, while the wave continues climbing, defying every law of nature, reaching for the palace like a giant's grasping hand. The sound grows beyond hearing, becoming a physical force that breaks windows and deafens those who don't cover their ears. Survival becomes paramount as you and Theron lead a small group of survivors to the sacred peak sanctuary, the only structure high enough to escape the series of waves that continue to assault the island. The climb that normally takes 2 hours stretches into a nightmare journey through a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Familiar paths buried under mud, entire hillsides collapsed, and steam venting from cracks that smell of the underworld. Among your group struggles the aged high priestess, Pasiphae, her elaborate ceremonial dress now weighing her down, soaked with mud and torn to tatters. Her sacred horns headdress has been abandoned, her painted face streaked beyond recognition, and her platform shoes replaced with bare feet, already bloody from sharp volcanic rocks. She leans heavily on a young temple initiate named Corinna, barely 13 years old, whose youth gives her strength the elders lack. The girl's simple white training robe has turned black with ash. Her hair, once carefully arranged in the maiden's style, now hangs in muddy ropes. Behind them, Admiral Kairos carries his grandson on his back, the bronze hook of his missing arm proving useful for maintaining balance on the treacherous slope. The child, no more than 5, clings silently to his grandfather's neck, too shocked to cry, his noble's finery reduced to rags. Each wave that strikes below sends tremors up the mountain, and you realize with growing horror that the island itself might not survive this assault. The Peak Sanctuary, once a place of divine communion, transforms into a refugee camp of unimaginable desperation as you help Theron organize the few hundred survivors who manage to reach safety. Noble ladies who've never lifted anything heavier than wine cups now haul water from the single spring that still runs clear. Their elaborate hairstyles collapsed, their jeweled fingers bloodied from unaccustomed labor. Lady Helene, wife of the Treasury Minister, sits in shock, staring at her hands, once soft as silk, now blistered and bleeding from climbing. Her famous beauty has vanished with her makeup, revealing a face older than cosmetics suggested, lined with grief as she realizes her 3 children were in the lower palace when the wave struck. She wears the remains of a fortune in jewels, but no one bothers to steal them. Gems cannot buy food or water in this new world. The sacred peak's flat summit, barely 200 paces across, holds more people than it was ever meant to accommodate. Bodies press against bodies, and the stench of fear sweat mixes with sulfur and death. Master Scribe Daedalon attempts to maintain records on broken pottery shards using charcoal from burned offerings, determined to document civilization's end, even as his crystal lenses lie broken at his feet. His assistant Philemon died in the climb, and the old man weeps as he writes, his tears mixing with ash to create an ink of sorrow. Night brings new terrors as you huddle with other survivors, while the mountain itself begins to shake. Not from earthquakes, but from something far more ominous. The island's ancient volcanic heart awakening after millennia of slumber. Red light paints the southern sky, where Thera Island, visible on clear days, now glows like a doorway to the underworld. Captain Alexios, using his sailor's knowledge of weather, points to an approaching cloud that defies nature. It moves against the wind, growing larger and darker, occasional lightning illuminating its interior with colors that shouldn't exist. The cloud carries the scent of burned stone and something else, something that makes everyone's primitive instincts scream, danger. Young Artemisia organizes the children, telling them stories of heroes while secretly distributing the last of the water, knowing most won't survive what's coming. Her natural leadership emerges from tragedy's chrysalis. The frightened girl, transformed into a woman of purpose. She's torn her skirts to make bandages, used her jewelry pins as needles for stitching wounds, and her privileged hands now confidently set broken bones. The temperature drops suddenly, unnaturally, frost forming on volcanic rocks that were burning hot hours ago. Theron pulls you aside to share a terrible calculation. The food salvaged might feed everyone for 2 days, or a select few for 2 weeks. The mathematics of survival have replaced the poetry of civilization, and every decision now carries the weight of choosing who lives and who dies. Dawn reveals the full scope of catastrophe as you stand with Theron surveying an island transformed beyond recognition, the very geography rewritten by nature's violence. Where the great harbour once welcomed ships from across the world, only a bay of black mud remains, studded with marble columns jutting like broken teeth. The lower palace, 5 stories of architectural marvel, has completely vanished, leaving only a depression that fills with steaming seawater. Of the city's 30,000 inhabitants, perhaps 500 cling to life on various peaks, their cooking fires sending up smoke signals of survival that mock the civilization that created them. A messenger arrives from the eastern settlements, a boy named Icarus, whose youth allowed him to outrun the waves. His feet are burned raw from running across hot ash, his voice gone from screaming warnings that no one heeded, and he communicates through gestures and writing in the dirt. His message brings no hope. The eastern cities are gone entirely, swallowed by cracks that open to reveal glowing rock below. The famous vineyard terraces that produced wine worth their weight in silver now look like giant stairs leading to nowhere. Each level collapsed into the one below. The sacred olive groves, trees that survived 1,000 years, stand as blackened skeletons against grey sky. Even the birds have fled or died, their absence creating a silence that makes every human sound seem like sacrilege against nature's funeral quiet. The struggle for resources turns desperate as you witness the complete breakdown of social order, with former nobles fighting over drops of water while Theron attempts to maintain authority through strength alone. General Rhadamanthys challenges his nephew's leadership, arguing that military discipline should replace royal bloodline in these savage times. The confrontation turns physical when Rhadamanthys draws his bronze sword, its blade notched from desperate fighting during the escape. His armour, once proudly polished, now bears dents from falling debris, and his general's plume has been replaced with a makeshift bandage around a head wound that won't stop bleeding. Theron responds not with his own blade, but with words that cut deeper, reminding the assembled survivors that Rhadamanthys' own cowardice led to abandoning the palace guard in the lower chambers. The general's face purples with rage, but his men won't meet his eyes, remembering their abandoned comrades. Order collapses entirely when someone spots a hidden water jar, and the resulting fight leaves 3 dead, including a pregnant woman crushed in the melee. The Oracle, if she still deserves that title, after failing to predict this specific catastrophe, sits apart from the chaos, her snakes long dead, her prophecies reduced to mad giggling. She is taken to eating ash, claiming it gives her visions of the future, though what future remains for any of them grows increasingly doubtful. Theron ages before your eyes, each decision carving new lines in his young face. The ash cloud from Thera's explosion finally reaches Crete as you help cover the faces of children while grey snow begins falling. each flake carrying the cremated remains of an entire island. The ash differs from normal fire ash. It's sharp as ground glass, cutting exposed skin, and when mixed with water, it forms cement that hardens in lungs. You watch in horror as those who don't cover their mouths begin coughing blood, their airways shredded by microscopic volcanic glass. An elderly priest named Chrysal, who spent 60 years tending the sacred flames, recognizes this as the prophecy's fulfillment, the breath of the gods that burns without fire. He tears his robes into strips, showing others how to make primitive masks, though he knows they only delay the inevitable. His knowledge of ancient texts makes him invaluable, remembering treatments and techniques from the last time the earth bled fire. Though those scrolls spoke of hundreds dying, not entire civilizations ending. The ash accumulates with terrifying speed, already ankle-deep and rising, burying the weakest who can no longer stand. A young mother named Melissa tries to shelter her infant by holding him inside her dress, but you can hear the child's labored breathing growing weaker. The baby represents the only birth on the mountain since the catastrophe, a spark of hope that dims with each rattling breath. Theron organizes the construction of crude shelters using clothes and broken pottery. But everyone knows they're building tombs, not homes. Starvation becomes the slow killer as you watch bodies consume themselves. The human architecture of muscle and fat dissolving until only walking skeletons remain. It has been 8 days since the last grain was distributed, and the strong have begun eyeing the weak, with calculations that would have horrified them weeks ago. A merchant named Demetrios, once famous for his vast belly and booming laugh, now looks like a deflated wineskin, his skin hanging in empty folds. He offers his entire hidden fortune, gold coins, sewn into his belt, for a single dried fig, but no one has food to sell at any price. His daughter, once plump and marriageable, now resembles an old woman, her hair falling out in clumps, her teeth loosening in bleeding gums. The children suffer most visibly, their bodies lacking reserves, transforming into creatures of enormous eyes and protruding bones that tent their skin like cloth over sticks. Artemisia organizes hunting parties to search for anything edible, roots, bark, leather from sandals boiled into soup, but the ash has poisoned everything it touches. You've seen people eating grass like cattle, chewing clay to fill their empty stomachs, and worse things that shouldn't be named. Theron himself refuses extra rations, distributing his portion to the children, and you watch his strong frame dwindle daily, his authority maintained now only through moral example rather than physical might. The mathematics of starvation are simple and terrible. In 3 more days, only half the current survivors will remain standing. Disease spreads through the packed survivors as you help tend the sick with no medicine beyond prayers and false hope. Watching infection claim those who survived water and ash. The wounds from the escape, left untreated, fester in the humid heat trapped under the ash clouds. A noble youth named Perseus, who showed such bravery during the evacuation, now writhes in fever dreams as infection spreads from a cut on his leg, the flesh turning black and reeking of decay. Without proper tools, Theron must make an impossible decision: attempt amputation with a bronze sword heated in fire, or watch the boy die slowly. The screams during the crude surgery echo across the mountain, and though they cauterize the stump with burning metal, Perseus dies anyway, his body too weakened to survive the shock. The oracle, in a moment of cruel clarity, points out that the traditional funeral rites cannot be performed. No wood for pyres, no boats for sea burial, no earth soft enough for graves. Bodies must be thrown from the cliffs or left for the vultures that have begun circling, drawn by the scent of death. Dysentery spreads fastest, the contaminated water turning bowels to water, leaving victims to die in their own filth while apologizing for the dishonor. A former palace healer named Macaon tries to maintain hygiene, but without clean water or herbs, he can only ease suffering, not prevent death. His medical knowledge, vast and useless, drives him to madness as he watches patients die from conditions he could have cured with simple herbs now buried under tons of ash. A ship appears on the horizon as you stand watch with Theron. But joy turns to horror when you realize it's not a rescue, but a plague ship. Its crew dead at their oars, driven by currents alone. The vessel, marked with Phoenician purple, drifts closer until you can see the bodies slumped over their stations, victims of the same ash that torments the island. One figure moves among the corpses, a single survivor waving frantically from the bow. Through extraordinary effort, several swimmers manage to guide the ship to a rocky inlet below the mountain, and the survivor climbs toward your camp. She introduces herself as Dido, a merchant's daughter from Tyre, speaking accented Greek through lips cracked from dehydration. Her tale brings no comfort. The ash cloud has spread across the entire Eastern Sea. Ports from Egypt to Anatolia report the same catastrophe, and civilization itself teeters on collapse. She wears Phoenician dress, now salt-stained and torn, a purple tunic that marks her high birth, gold bracelets turned green from seawater, and her hair, once elaborately styled, now resembles rope. Her ship fled Tyre with 200 souls. She alone survived by drinking wine mixed with seawater, a technique her grandfather taught her. The ship's hold contains amphora of wine and dried fish, enough to extend survival by days, maybe a week, but also brings terrible knowledge. There's nowhere to sail to. No safe harbor remains in the known world. The realization breaks something in the survivors. Hope dying as finally as those plague ship sailors. Cannibalism enters whispered discussions as you overhear desperate conversations that would have meant instant execution mere weeks ago. Survival's arithmetic overruling civilization's taboos. An anonymous group approaches Theron with a horrifying proposition. The elderly and dying could serve one final purpose, their sacrifice allowing the young to survive. The spokesman, his identity hidden behind an ash-covered cloth, argues with terrible logic that eating those already dead wastes nothing, preserves life, and might be considered a sacred act. Theron responds by drawing his sword, not to threaten, but to offer it handle first, telling them if they've fallen so far, they should start with him and bear that curse forever. The group disperses, but you notice glances toward the weakest, calculations being made in desperate minds. That night, an elderly scribe named Nestor disappears, and though everyone claims ignorance, you notice a group seems less hungry the next morning. The oracle laughs at the horror, reminding all that the ancient texts speak of times when gods themselves consumed their children. Artemisia organizes constant watches, not against external threats, but to protect the weak from their supposed protectors. The social fabric hasn't just torn, it's been burned entirely, leaving only animal instinct clothed in the rags of humanity. You realize that even if rescue came tomorrow, these survivors could never return to civilization. They've seen and done things that mark souls forever. The earth provides one final insult as you experience the mountain itself beginning to crack. volcanic vents opening to release poisonous gases that kill silently in the night. You wake to find a dozen dead in their sleep, their faces peaceful, perhaps the kindest death available now. The vents glow red in the darkness, painting everything in hellish light, and the heat they produce makes the already difficult air nearly unbreathable. Master Potter Cadmos, one of the few craftsmen to survive, recognizes the gases from his kilns. Sulfur and worse, invisible killers that pool in low areas. He organizes the survivors to move constantly, never sleeping in the same place twice, though exhaustion makes this nearly impossible. His expertise with heat and gases makes him invaluable, teaching people to hold cloth over the vents to test for poison, watching for the telltale shimmer of deadly air. A young couple, planning to marry before the catastrophe, decide to walk into the largest vent together rather than slowly starve. They dress in their finest remaining clothes, share a last kiss, and disappear into the red glow while others watch with envy rather than horror. The mountain has become not refuge but prison, its peak shrinking as more areas become uninhabitable. Theron must constantly reorganize the survivors into smaller and smaller spaces. Bodies pressed together despite disease. Dignity abandoned for the simple goal of waking up tomorrow. Each dawn brings a count of the dead, and the number still breathing drops with mechanical precision. Memory becomes fluid as you notice survivors beginning to forget their own names. Malnutrition and trauma eroding minds as surely as bodies waste away. A nobleman who once governed provinces now speaks to invisible servants, ordering banquets from empty air, his mind retreating to better times. His wife plays along, pretending to taste imaginary wine, their shared madness perhaps kinder than reality. Children who've forgotten their parents' faces attached to any adult who shows kindness, creating makeshift families from tragedy's fragments. Theron struggles to maintain historical records, knowing that if any survive, they must remember what happened here. But even he sometimes calls you by his dead brother's name. The Oracle's madness has evolved into something else. She claims to remember the future, describing flying metal birds and cities of glass. Visions so impossible they must be delirium. Yet her description of weapons that burn cities from across the sea, of plagues that kill millions in days, seem almost prophetic warnings of humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Language itself begins to break down as people revert to gestures and grunts. Civilization's greatest achievement dissolving into primitive communication. You find yourself forgetting words for things that no longer exist. Comfort, safety, hope, while learning new ones for different types of hunger, various stages of dying. The priest Chrysaor maintains sanity by reciting epic poems from memory, his voice the last thread connecting this hellscape to the culture that created it. Rain finally comes, but it brings no relief as the water mixes with ash to create a cement-like mud that traps and suffocates, turning the mountain into a death trap of different design. You watch in horror as the grey sludge flows like a living thing, filling depressions where survivors huddle, forcing constant movement on legs already too weak to stand. A family of 4, too exhausted to flee, disappears under a mudslide that moves with deceptive slowness, their calls for help muffled and then silenced. The rain tastes of sulfur and burns exposed skin, as if the sky itself has turned poisonous, making collection of drinking water impossible. Theron organizes human chains to pull people from the mud, but for everyone saved, 2 more succumb. the arithmetic of rescue as cruel as everything else. The oracle strips naked and dances in the acidic rain, claiming it cleanses her visions, her skin blistering and peeling as she laughs at the sky's cruelty. Shelters collapse under the weight of wet ash, crushing those too weak to escape. Their deaths perhaps merciful compared to continued survival. The mud preserves bodies perfectly, creating natural molds of faces, frozen in final moments, an inadvertent monument to civilization's end. Admiral Kairos, the one-armed sailor who survived pirates and storms, drowns in 2 feet of mud, his bronze hook unable to find purchase on the slippery ground. His grandson watches, with eyes too traumatized to cry, adding another orphan to the growing collection of children without futures. The final livestock dies as you watch Theron make the decision to slaughter the last goat. A scrawny creature that survived by eating ash-covered grass, its milk long since dried up. The animal seems to understand its fate, standing still as the bronze knife opens its throat, too weak to struggle or bleat. The division of meat becomes a ceremony of desperate fairness. Each survivor receives a portion so small it would have been an insult to guests before, now treated as sacred treasure. Children gnaw on bones until they splinter, sucking marrow that provides more psychological than nutritional sustenance. The goat's hide is immediately claimed for clothing, its organs fought over by those who remember that liver provides strength. Even its blood is collected in pottery shards, mixed with ash to create a paste that some claim fills the stomach's emptiness. You notice people have begun looking at the camp dogs with the same calculating gaze, once reserved for the goat. The dogs themselves, once loyal palace hounds, have formed a pack, their domestication reversing as they scavenge among the dead. One massive mastiff, collar marking it as the king's own hunting dog, now leads the pack with yellow eyes that hold no recognition of former masters. Theron forbids hunting the dogs, knowing that once that line is crossed, no taboo remains sacred, but you see people sharpening sticks, preparing for when authority finally collapses completely. Madness manifests in organized religion as a new cult forms among the survivors, worshipping the volcano as a god that demands human sacrifice for appeasement. The cult's leader, a former temple dancer named Thalassa, claims the goddess spoke to her through the earth's tremors, demanding blood to calm her rage. She has gathered followers among the most desperate, those who need to believe their suffering has meaning beyond random catastrophe. Thalassa has painted her entire body with ash mixed with blood, creating patterns that shift in the volcanic light, and her followers mark themselves similarly. She wears a crown made from birds' skulls found after the ash fall, their empty sockets seeming to watch accusingly. Her sermons grow increasingly violent, claiming that the pure must die to save the corrupt, that civilization fell because it grew too proud. The first sacrifice comes voluntarily. A mother whose children have all died offers herself, walking into a volcanic vent while Thalassa chants in a language she claims the goddess taught her. Theron tries to stop the ceremony, but finds himself outnumbered by believers who see this as their only hope. The cult grows daily as desperation makes any belief preferable to accepting meaningless doom. You watch civilization's death throes manifest as return to primordial superstition, 10,000 years of advancement dissolving in weeks. The oracle laughs at the new religion, reminding all that the gods they're trying to appease are the same ones who sent the destruction, Communication with other peaks reveals the full scope of survival as mirror signals flash between mountains, each reporting their numbers in a code that grows simpler as educated signalers die. Mount Ida to the west signals they have 40 souls left from an original 3,000, while Mount Dictee responds with just 12, adding that they're considering descent despite the poisoned lowlands. The signalling system, once used to coordinate trade fleets across the empire, now serves to document extinction's progress. A young scribe named Alexis has appointed himself record keeper of these signals, using charcoal on pottery shards to maintain the last census of Minoan civilization. His dedication to documentation borders on obsession, insisting that someone must witness the end, that forgetting would be the final insult. By his count, fewer than 800 Minoans remain alive across all Crete, from a population that once numbered hundreds of thousands. The signals bring one piece of hope. A peak on the far eastern shore reports seeing ships on the horizon, though whether they're rescue or more plague vessels remains unknown. Theron orders constant watch on that eastern horizon, but the ash clouds make visibility limited to brief clearings that tease with possibilities. The mirror signals become a daily ritual, each peak confirming its continued existence, though some days bring no response from locations that signaled the day before, their silence more eloquent than any death cry. The final stores discovered in a hidden palace cache provide 3 days of false hope as you help distribute grain that survived sealed in the mysterious jars the potters created before the catastrophe. The oracle claims she dreamed of this cache, though Theron suspects she knew of it all along, waiting until desperation peaked to reveal its location. The grain, mixed with water, creates a paste that tastes of earth and time, but fills stomachs that have shrunk to fist size. Children cry at the richness of it, their bodies struggling to process solid food after weeks of starvation. An old woman named Pythia dies from eating too quickly, her shriveled stomach rupturing from the sudden fullness, a cruel irony that food itself becomes deadly. The distribution causes the first true violence in days as a man strikes down his own brother for a larger portion, the sound of bronze meeting skull echoing across the camp. Theron must execute the murderer, using precious energy to maintain justice in a world where laws seem meaningless. The execution itself becomes surreal, condemning someone to death who would die anyway within days, maintaining civilization's rituals at its very end. Admiral Kairos's grandson, the orphaned child, shares his portion with younger children, showing nobility that shames the adults fighting over crumbs. The 3 days pass with mechanical precision, each meal smaller than the last, until the jars stand empty as the promises they represented. Ships appear clearly on the horizon as you stand with Theron watching salvation or doom approach, unable to determine which until they're close enough to see their colours. The vessels move steadily despite the lack of wind, using oars in perfect synchronization that speaks of disciplined crews, not plague ships or pirates. As they approach, you recognize Egyptian designs. The Eye of Horus painted on their prows, their sails bearing hieroglyphics. Captain Amenemheb, wearing the gold collar of Pharaoh's navy, arrives at the beach below the mountain with 20 marines, their bronze armor unmarred by catastrophe. He speaks perfect Greek, explaining that Egypt suffered from the ashfall, but survived through preparations their priests initiated after reading celestial omens. They've come not as conquerors, but as salvagers, seeking survivors with valuable skills, scribes who know the trade routes, craftsmen who can work bronze, anyone who can contribute to Egypt's recovery. The selection process proves cruel as families are separated, the useful taken, while the weak are left behind. Theron negotiates desperately, trying to save as many as possible. But the Egyptians have precise requirements. They'll take 100 people, no more, chosen for skills rather than nobility. The realization that salvation exists but remains selective breaks many survivors' last hope. Parents lie about children's ages to make them seem useful, while elderly craftsmen demonstrate skills with shaking hands, auditioning for life itself. The selection divides the survivors as you watch Theron make impossible choices about who boards the Egyptian ships and who remains to die on the poisoned island. He includes Artemisia, though she argues to stay with him, knowing that someone must preserve the royal bloodline, even if the kingdom no longer exists. Master Scribe Daedalon makes the list for his knowledge of Linear A, though he can barely walk and must be carried to the boats. The Egyptians reject the oracle despite her religious significance, claiming their gods have no room for failed prophets. She laughs at this, prophesying that Egypt too will fall, that all empires are merely postponing inevitable collapse. Children with craft skills are taken while nobles without practical knowledge are abandoned, overturning 10,000 years of social hierarchy in a single afternoon. A mother named Cassandra breaks down when told she can go, but must leave her crippled son, choosing to stay and die with him rather than live with abandonment's guilt. The potter Cadmos is selected for his knowledge of ceramic techniques, but he refuses to leave without his apprentices, negotiating desperately until the Egyptians agree to take 2 boys instead of him. Theron himself is offered passage as a valuable hostage and potential puppet ruler, but he chooses to remain with those who can't be saved, the last king of Crete accepting his fate. The beach becomes a scene of farewells too painful for words, families torn apart by survival's cruel mathematics. The ships depart as you remain with Theron and 200 souls deemed unworthy of salvation, watching the last hope disappear beyond the horizon. Those left behind divide into 3 groups: the resigned who simply sit and wait for death, the angry who rage at the sky and abandon gods, and the determined who continue struggling despite futility. The oracle has entered a state of perpetual prophecy, speaking constantly of futures that will never exist for any present. Her words recorded by young Alexis, who stayed voluntarily to document the end. An old priest named Deucalion organizes final religious ceremonies, arguing that maintaining ritual provides meaning even at extinction's edge. He performs marriages for young couples who want to die bonded, funeral rites for the living who want their names remembered, and baptisms for children who'll never reach adulthood. The ceremonies use ash for oil, mud for wine, and memory for incense, but their solemnity remains undiminished. Theron builds a monument from volcanic stones, carving names of the dead with his bronze knife, knowing the monument will outlast them all. Each name takes hours to carve with weakened hands, but he continues with methodical determination, creating the only legacy possible. The remaining survivors develop a strange peace, freed from hope's burden, finding unexpected grace in accepting fate. Stories are told of the old days, not with nostalgia, but as gifts to the young, ensuring they die knowing they came from something greater than this ending. Time loses meaning as days blend into each other, measured only by the steadily decreasing number of survivors and the unchanging grey of the ash-darkened sky. You've stopped counting sunrises, if the pale lightning of eastern darkness can still be called sunrise. Theron has grown gaunt beyond recognition, his princely bearing reduced to skeletal determination as he continues caring for those who remain. His voice, once commanding enough to fill the throne room, now whispers like wind through ruins. The monument has grown to include nearly 1,000 names, his life's work becoming death's record. Children who arrived on the mountain as toddlers have aged rapidly, their faces holding expressions that belong on elderly philosophers contemplating mortality. Little Io, the girl who organized the children, has stopped speaking entirely, communicating only through gestures and eyes that have seen too much. She spends her days collecting small objects, buttons, pottery shards, bits of jewelry from the dead, creating tiny museums of the vanished world. The oracle's prophecies have evolved into pure poetry, speaking in rhythms that hypnotize listeners even when her words make no logical sense. She describes cities under the sea where people breathe water, lands where ice never melts, and machines that think without minds. Her prophecies might be madness, or perhaps glimpses of humanity's far future, assuming any humans survive elsewhere. The distinction between madness and sanity has become meaningless when reality itself has become insane. The final water source begins failing as the spring that has sustained the remaining survivors runs increasingly brackish, tainted by volcanic minerals seeping through the mountain's dying heart. You help dig desperately for new sources, but find only mud that burns the tongue and stones that weep sulphurous tears. The effort to dig exhausts bodies already pushed beyond endurance, and 3 elderly survivors die from the exertion, their hearts simply stopping mid-motion. An engineer named Icarus attempts to construct a distillation system using broken pottery and cloth, trying to purify the poisoned water. But the apparatus produces only drops, while people need gallons. Children lick morning dew from stones, their tongues turning black from the volcanic residue, while adults discuss whether drinking their own blood might extend life by hours. The oracle claims she no longer needs water, that the gods sustain her directly, though you notice her sneaking sips when she thinks nobody watches. Theron rations the remaining drinkable water with mathematical precision, 2 mouthfuls per person per day, enough to prevent immediate death, but not enough to prevent the slow desiccation of bodies. Lips crack and bleed, tongues swell, and speech becomes nearly impossible as mouths turn to dessert. Some survivors have begun drinking seawater in desperation, knowing it brings madness and death, but unable to resist moisture's call. The sound of the sea below becomes torture, all that water just out of reach. Poisoned by salt and volcanic ash, the end approaches with quiet dignity as the remaining 50 survivors gather for what everyone knows will be their last sunset, the sky briefly clearing enough to see the sun paint the ash clouds in shades of amber and blood. You sit beside Theron as he completes the final names on his monument, including spaces for those still breathing, leaving only his own name uncarved. The oracle has fallen silent after days of continuous prophecy, her voice finally failing, though her eyes still burn with visions she can no longer share. Artemisia would have been safe in Egypt, but a messenger bird arrived yesterday, revealing she threw herself from the ship, rather than live as the last Minoan princess, choosing honor over survival. The news broke something in Theron that starvation and catastrophe couldn't touch, aging him decades in moments. The children have created a final artwork, using charcoal and clay to paint the story of Crete on a flat stone. Crude figures showing palaces and bulls, ships and waves, ending with stick figures growing smaller and smaller until they disappear. Deucalion the priest performs a last ceremony, blessing the dying with water too precious to waste. But nobody objects to this final observance of civilization's rituals. Stories are told of personal memories rather than myths. Favorite meals, loved ones' laughs, the feeling of clean clothes and soft beds. Mundane treasures now more valuable than gold. As darkness falls, survivors huddle together for warmth, no longer separated by class or age. Just humans facing the infinite night together. Dawn brings no awakening for most as you find yourself among only a handful still breathing, including Theron, who uses his last strength to carve his own name on the monument. The oracle died smiling in the night, her final prophecy written in the arrangement of her corpse. Arms spread toward Egypt, where some Minoans still live, ensuring the bloodline continues, even if the civilization ends. Young Alexis still writes, his pottery shards forming a ceramic library that archaeologists will discover 3,000 years hence, puzzling over Lineare's mysteries. His dedication to documentation has outlasted his body's strength. He writes lying down, unable to stand, using his own blood when the charcoal runs out. Theron speaks his final words to you, not as prince to subject, but as one human to another, asking you to remember not the palace's glory, but the dignity with which Crete faced its ending. He describes a dream where future scholars discover these ruins and wonder at the civilization that created such beauty, never knowing how it ended, the mystery perhaps kinder than truth. The mountain has become a necropolis, bodies arranged with what ceremony exhaustion allows, faces turned toward the sea they once ruled. As Theron closes his eyes for the last time, still sitting upright against his monument, you realize you're the last witness to Europe's first great civilization. The sun breaks through the ash clouds momentarily, illuminating the monument where 1,000 names record an empire's final roll call, before clouds close again, like a curtain falling on history's bloodiest stage.